For joining us. I'm Peter Mayrick from Partners in Ministry, and it's such a pleasure to have you joining us today for the first of this leadership webinar series. Partners in Ministry exists to support churches. We want to see churches flourish right across Australia, and the way that we do that is by supporting church leaders so that you can lead churches well under God. Last year, we did a survey of church leaders to try and identify what are the issues that you think are most important to address. And so over the coming months, we're going to run these webinars to deal with these issues. Today, we're dealing with the issue of some of the trends that we see in leadership. And so I hope you enjoy it. I hope you find it useful. I'm going to be joined by Craig Farmer, who heads up our New South Wales team, and Tim Hanna, who heads up our Queensland team. Today, the three trends we're going to address are a big one, which is pastors being under pressure. As we did our research and we asked people, we realised there's so much going on in a pastor's life and a leader's life. There are many hats to be worn. Am I a leader? Am I a teacher? Am I a manager? Am I an organiser, administrator? And yet at the same time, many of us feel the pressure to perform and to see certain outputs. And yet at the same time, the leadership we're asked to exert has been difficult, particularly coming out of COVID-19. The second trend we're going to address is the trend about trying to get the balance between looking internally and discipling internally versus looking externally, particularly from an evangelistic point of view. And then the third one we want to look at is one that we think a lot of ministers are talking about, a lot of pastors are talking about, which is this idea of character formation, of discipleship. The number of ministers, the number of leaders who've said to us, you know, as we came into COVID, we started recognising that church is not the church meeting. Church is a lot more, and we want to focus on that. So we're going to deal with those three trends over the next hour. We're going to give you lots of time to ask questions and have discussion. So please do use either the chat function or the Q&A function, and we'll seek to answer those questions. If we don't get to answer all the questions, we will seek to try and address that later on. But thank you so much for joining us today. Let's kick off. I'm going to introduce Tim Hanna. Tim Hanna, you may know, has a strong background in church leadership, in different systems, different denominations. But Tim, you would know, has also headed up Compassion Australia for many, many years, the last decade. And I'm so pleased to be able to say Tim Hanna heads up Partners in Ministry in Queensland. Well, we don't just limit you to Queensland, do we, Tim? You can work anywhere. Zoom has been magnificent. Tim, why don't you lead us through and talk about this first area of wrestling or dealing with the complexity of being a pastor?
Thanks, Peter. Who would want to leave Queensland? But anyway, it's good to be here. Good to be sharing. And pastors under pressure, who would have thought? It's nothing new. We pastors are under pressure in 2019, but there's something about this season that has intensified, catalyzed all that, and that it had accelerated the pressure that people were under. So it's a very real thing at the moment. And as I said, it's happening. One of the reasons it's happening, I think, is many, but one of them is the number of ways leaders have had to pivot, they've had to change, they've had to do things. Traditionally, historically, if you were a competent communicator and preacher and did pastoral care pretty well, that was a job well done in the local church. But that has changed, and now there's a lot more hats you've got to wear. So you're still a preacher, but you're not just a preacher, an online preacher. You're a pastoral carer, but you're not just, pastoral. You're a pastoral carer in a complex virtual world now, and that's very different. You're all of that. You have to be an innovator. There's things that are happening day by day that change, that you have to think very fast on your feet, whereas we could have had more time to think about that and collaborate with that before. You're a team leader, but your team leader isn't with you in person now. The team leader's been, virtual. The team's been virtual. So a whole bunch of things. All of those things. You're concerned about financial implications of this COVID period. You're concerned about all of that. All of that forms together just an added pressures that build up in the lives of pastors and leaders. Are people coming back? Will we be able to, find the people who used to be here but are not here, all of that. And the pace of change has been relatively quick. It's one day you're free flowing, and the next day you've been told there's a lockdown in 2 days. And people are left in your congregations, people are left with uncertainty. They don't know what's happening. They're left with a lack of clarity. So you used to be able to kind of know what was happening in the months ahead. You don't. People are left with fear of failure. Some of us as leaders are fear of failure. And you know, those metrics that we have traditionally and for decades measured by, you know, bottoms on seats, bucks, dollars, buildings, those measures that have been traditionally church measures are no longer working. Where we might have liked to see them go up to the right, what's happened in this period of time is they've gone down to the right, and we're not quite sure how to address that. So there's a whole heap of things for pastors that are, and the expectations and the pressure to perform is enormous. And if you haven't had your sense of worth, if you've had your sense of worth or your sense of identity and security in what you do in the title of pastor or the church you lead, and that doesn't go as well as it used to, it doesn't look like it's going as well as it used to, then you're in trouble, because the pressure mounts. You don't have those figures to show which are glistening and glowing, and it's thrown you into chaos. There's some nuanced pressures as well on people. If you're not the lead person, but you're on a preaching team and you might have preached at different services, and now there's one service going out, you don't preach as much as you used to, and so start to question the value or the worth of things. The dollars are not quite what they used to be. If you're a leader, a lead pastor, you're thinking to yourself, you know, will there be staff I have to get rid of? Will there be people who now work with me, who I've worked with for years, who we won't be able to pay in the future? And if there's an inability to work in person, I love working in person, but I can't work in person. There's a general sense of this isn't what I signed up for. And you put that together with the training model that we've had in the past and some of the models of leadership, some of those just falling by the wayside. I mean, we have probably in the past thought, we've trained very much that if we've trained people with good theology and the ability to communicate it reasonably well and care for people, then that's all we need, will be a success. But now there are so many other things being measured, and the expectation that other people and ourselves is being questioned all the time. And the world I trained for is no longer no longer there. It's a new world. So we're seeing models of leadership that we held in high esteem, whether it be authoritarian models are falling down, where, you know, dictatorial authoritarian, one person up the front model. Also the congregational model, where you can't make a decision until the whole congregation together. Those kind of models are falling apart. So when you look at what's happening around the place and where the last 2 years has left us, and we're not fully out of there by any means, you realize that altogether there's a whole array of things which make it very difficult for leaders and pastors, and no wonder people are under pressure. So, I mean, that's a quick précis of why we're under pressure, but that's where we're at, and I think that's why it's important to talk about that and to be available for coaching people in that whole process, because that's what we want to do, walk alongside people in that place.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Yeah, as you say, we love coaching people, we love mentoring people because we believe in leadership. But it has become more complex. Now, you've been a church leader yourself. You've led a large church. You've led a smaller church. How did you manage wearing multiple hats as a church leader? You'd have had a big team, a small team. Any secrets?
I don't think of any secrets. I don't think of any silver bullets, Peter. But I think you've got to understand that there are hats that you wear, and be prepared to change them quickly. So if you move from a leadership role that you're in, and you're now working people in a different role, you've got to take that hat off. And working with a board, you've got to take that up, change a different hat. But I think the pace of life is so quick, and the pace of ministry changes are so quick, that one of the things we have to do, and I've done it better in later years than I did early years, is to take a step back sometimes and just simply take time to reflect on how am I doing, how am I going, who can I go to for feedback, who can I get alongside me in this journey, because it's very easy to feel alone, like you're the only person who's who's there. So, and I think the key thing is don't lose yourself in the process. Sometimes we look at other people who seem to be doing well and other churches that are going better than ours, and we try to copy or imitate. You know, don't lose yourself in the process. But there's no silver bullets.
It's so important, isn't it? I'm reminded, Tim, of something we said earlier about leadership. You know, don't lose yourself, as you said. Keep reflecting. We're going to look at burnout and the reflection that is important for dealing with exhaustion and burnout, probably in our third or fourth webinar. But one of the things we talked about in leadership is just continually remind yourself what we're here for, and not to be distracted by what the hats bring up, what the outcomes might bring up. We're here to live out Christ's mission, and he's here for us. You know, he is sovereign. Tim, have you got any examples of people or just situations where you've seen this done really, really well?
Look, I think if we are coming out, it's kind of questionable, but as COVID seems to be at least developing our way, so we're starting to see a new day, a new future. I think we've got to make sure we don't just fall back into the past. Let's go back to what it was like, because there are some new shoots happening, and I think we've got to be able to open those new shoots and see where they're leading. But if we try to go back and do that, and when you're weary, you're not as creative as you, or open to creativity as you normally are. And so the temptation, let's just get back to where we were. But I think the churches that are saying, okay, it is a new day. It's frustrated us. It's still not clear. There's still lack of clarity. There's still uncertainty. But what are some of the green shoots we can see allowing for us and get ourselves into that? And the other thing is to make sure we are getting alongside teams and staff and teams of volunteers, because, you know, the more we can collaborate together and work together in this whole space, the better we'll be.
Yeah. Thank you, brother. This kind of leads in nicely to that second issue, that second trend we're talking about. But if you've got a question that you want to raise for Tim to answer or any of us to answer, please don't hesitate to put it into the question and answer or the chat box. Tim Stevens, great to see you, brother. Let's go to Craig. Craig, the second trend that we identified was this issue of getting the balance between outward and inward focus. You know, leadership is challenging, and in a church life, it's become really, really challenging, and yet a real opportunity as we look at internal and external. What do you think about this issue?
Absolutely. Thanks, Peter. And hi, everyone. Yeah, so this is an ongoing both dilemma and opportunity. You know, many churches have had to go into almost survival mode, haven't you? You've been pivoting, as Tim said. The expectations and some of the results have been patchy or fantastic, depending. And so there's been a real hankering, has there not, for the loss of community, connection. And so there's been this tendency, the trend that we've noticed is for many churches to almost hunker back down and think about how do we reconnect as a church community. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually really, really important. So we're not saying that's a negative. The dilemma, though, is do we have the bandwidth? And many churches don't feel like they have. As Tim said, there's a lot of tiredness, and that's certainly understandable. But do we have the bandwidth to think about what outreach actually looks like? You know, many churches tell us that they're seeing around about those that are out of full-on lockdowns, around about 70% of their people come back, some as low as 50, some a bit higher. The NCLS have done some research around this, and we found it really interesting. So we're just going to put this up on the screen, and it tells us that as we look at the number of people that are connecting at a religious service over time, and it's roughly about once a month, we see that in 16, it was around 18%. It went up to 20, up to 21, just pre-pandemic, down to 16, but now it just bumped back up to around 21%. So it's an interesting thing that we haven't seen a massive exodus of people who are connecting. But we also know that we're seeing around about 18% of people in 20 and 21 who have said that they've they've actually attended an online service, 18%. Now, I'm sure you've seen more than 18% of your people, but this is the aggregate right across. Thanks, Phil, for that slide. But the other thing that we find interesting is that when we look at the stats about the connection points, that in baby boomers, Gen X and Gen Y, roughly we're seeing about 5% drop in attendance and the like. So we've got this real trend of how do we reconnect and a dilemma in that. But the I guess the connection point is the dilemma of how do we reach out and have we lost that? I think one of the things that we've noticed in the pandemic is that in this sort of survival mode, so much energy, of course, has been given to that. And many churches have been doing outreach, but it's been what I might call welfare outreach, you know, food hampers and immediate assistance, which has been fantastic. But what we've noticed is that evangelism has been struggling, at the very least, right across. Now, that's not all churches, that might not be your church, but it's certainly a trend that we're noticing. And so there's both a dilemma and opportunity. The dilemma is, have our churches been equipping people to naturally engage and connect with and evangelize those around them? And probably at this point, we're saying it's a big open question mark. But the other thing that we've noticed, and it's a trend that's macro to the church, is that, yes, we can do a lot of things virtually. And so people are going to your churches from other states and other countries even, but also the world's become smaller. So our neighborhoods are becoming a lot more important to us. So this is an opportunity, I think, for churches that listen deeply to their neighborhood, where they ask the question, how do we truly serve and love? And that's where the welfare outreach is really important, but we need to potentially go beyond that to relationships. And one of the things that we know is that relationships are so important. And you know this, but I want to just remind you of this as we think about this as a trend. The NCLS, and if we can put the next slide up, the NCLS did a big survey and they asked the question, would you be open to going to church if someone asked you? And you might have seen this stat, but essentially it's saying around 30% of people say, yeah, I'd be open to it. Now, whether they go, we don't know, but 30% is a large amount, isn't it? But here's the kicker, that when NCLS asks people, do you have a close friend or a family member who currently attends church and or is a Christian? More than half, 56%, do not know anyone who is a Christian or goes to church. And I think there's an opportunity for us as we think about how to reconnect in our neighborhoods, as our worlds become maybe less, about traveling, we actually maybe can rethink and put some energy into how do we love and serve and share the gospel. So it's a trend that we notice that churches are potentially hunkering into holy huddles and reconnecting. That's not a bad thing. But also churches are starting to ask, we're connecting maybe through immediate support. How do we really embed ourselves in our neighborhoods in a meaningful, relational way, which opens up the invitation?
Craig, that's just fascinating, mate. There's a couple of people have asked a question about one of those slides, and I'll just answer the question because you can't see it there. That slide about 21% was a question of the Australian community. And it's really helpful because what it shows is we think that church-going has gone down, and yet the number of people across Australian East Coast has remained about 1 in 5. It's dropped down to 16% and come back up to 21% of the number of Australians who said that they are coming to church at least monthly. So yes, the number of people who say that they are not going to church or are not Christian in the census has gone up over the years, the so-called rise of the nuns. And yet there still remains about 1 in 5 people who say that they're going to church at least monthly. And so there's real opportunity. Craig, that last stat that you put up there about the fact that people's propensity attend church. The thing I love is that hasn't changed much over the period. But where you finished there was the idea of churches moving from like a welfare evangelism back into a community evangelism. What do you see churches doing? What does good look like in this space? Have you seen any good examples?
Well, I think that and we'll talk about this in a second, Peter, but one of the things that is the real dilemma and an opportunity is that churches can't run as many events. And so we actually recognize that relationships are, as that stat says, vitally important. So the churches that are really, I guess, picking up that challenge are equipping people with the skills and the confidence, and I guess even the mandate, let's do less that we are running. And how do we encourage you to relate to people, give you the space to do that? And as I said, the confidence and the skills to know how to do that, because there's a big difference between wanting to and knowing how to. And so I think that's a slower journey, and it's less spectacular because, getting 20 people at the front of an event, or, 10 people putting up their hand and saying, yeah, I want to follow Jesus, seems more visible and more exciting even. I've been there, done that. But seeing someone whose family member comes along because someone invited them, or having a spiritual conversation with a friend over the fence is less tangible, but that's where I think our opportunity lies when we think about what the Australian community responds to and where our community is going to.
Thanks, mate. So it's the long haul, and it really is, coming back to Tim's comment, helping people, as leaders, we have a responsibility to help people stay on the main game, to understand what the church is about. And this internal-external balance, actually, if I get you right, what you're saying is we probably need to be working on the internal and trusting the internal to reach the external. There's a synergy that's required to trust discipleship in action.
Yeah, that's right. It's exactly right, Peter. It's as we disciple and as we help people form, that will be the natural byproduct. And I think, if I was just to say it maybe a little bit bluntly, and maybe people will disagree with this, but it might be showing up that some of our formation and discipleship processes aren't quite where we thought they were at. That's how I would say that.
Thank you, mate.
At a very practical level, Peter, one of the things that Partners in Ministry really tries to do is come alongside churches to think about its strategy around its discipleship and evangelism. It's not a either-or conversation. And so, we do that in one day or multiple days, which we'd always love to do that with churches and pastors and leaders.
Thank you, brother. And I forgot to introduce you properly at the start. I won't go right back, but I will say, friends, Craig Farmer is one of the consultants of consultants. He consults to a whole bunch. Yes, he's got a background as a pastor, but he consults into different sectors right across the not-for-profit and the for-profit sector, as well as churches. And we have a large team of people, and we would love to help you work through this balance of internal, external. How do you help people to grow that they might bring others along to know Jesus and share it? Craig, just one other question on this one that raises for me. So we spent a bit of time on the external engagement. One of the challenges you raised, or the opportunities, is the internal engagement. How are churches engaging with their own people? And have you got any examples of what good looks like in this space?
Well, Tim might have some ideas as well, Peter. So, don't want to hog that if it's helpful to bring Tim in as well. But I think that, there is an aspect of, obviously, as we gather people back together, we can start to build intentional fellowship events that reconnect relationally. And I think, churches are starting to do that. There's some nervousness though, Peter, as, many churches would tell me that they're not, people are still, there's a hesitancy. So I don't think a lot of churches have pushed the go button here. There's a lot of people that are working that through. And so I don't know if I've got a lot of data yet to tell us what good looks like without hearkening back to the past. So I'll just leave that one unless Tim's got any other, or you've got any other thoughts.
No. Tim, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, look, my only thought would be that one of the things that COVID has shown us as church leaders is that discipleship just can't be a section of the church. It can't just be a program of the church, or that discipleship is a whole of life thing. It's growing as a follower of Jesus. And I think for many years we've sort of said, well, we've treated discipleship as programs. You come and learn how to do this about your faith. You come and learn how to do this part of your faith, and we'll teach you cerebrally or academically what to do. We'll tell you the tactics to use and programs to do. But I think what COVID has shown us is you can't do it that way. It's all of life. It's Jesus didn't give a whole bunch of instructions. He said, "Come follow me." That was it. And I learned that on the journey as well. And I think one of the things that COVID has done is made us rethink what this journey of discipleship is about. For example, some of the places who are looking at some of those green shoots are saying, well, hang on, we've had to go online during COVID, but actually online might be a green shoot. And I know there's churches who are saying that's a new campus. That's a campus now. It's not just an aberration we couldn't meet. It's actually another way to do. And there are online small groups. Everything you'd see in a local church, as much as you can, everything you'd see in a physical church, and now happening online, and with great opportunities. So I think as Craig said, we can't be locked into what we've always done. We've got to be thinking, where are these green shoots, and give them a go. Give them a go. I think in basketball they say you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and if we become risk averse in this time, we will shrink, and I think that's a sad.
Yeah, mate, it's really helpful. When you say green shoots and give them a go, I'm reminded experiments are really valuable here. The difference between an experiment and a pilot is that a pilot we want to keep on going. An experiment has a chance of being good or bad and giving it a crack. And I know it takes energy, but experiments are really helpful. I want to say in consultancy, and you heard both Craig and Tim giving an each way bet on a couple of things there, which is really important. We want to be very, very careful as consultants to never say, here's the way to do it. There's one way to do it, cookie cut and do it that. We want to work with you wherever we work to help you to find the solution that is right for your place. And I'm reminded, Craig, as you said that about, or Tim, as the idea of online, some churches, the exactly right thing will do is to finish the online service. And other churches, it's exactly the opposite. The best thing to do is to continue it. So we want to encourage you to think through these things deeply. And we want to avoid, as consultants, being cookie cut merchants as we go through there. Guys, maybe that brings us to our third topic. The third trend that we're looking at is one about people working at a deeper level, discipleship. The number of ministers who I talk to, church leaders, who are saying, we need to get serious about discipleship. Some of it's come from disappointment in where people have been at through COVID. Others of it has been through excitement and seeing how well people have survived COVID. Tim, do you want to start by just talking about this? How would you approach the journey of discipleship as we move into this topic?
Yeah, look, it's a little bit of a continuation of what I mentioned before, is that discipleship, we have to see it as not a section of the church or a part of the church, or that some people are training in discipleship and some people aren't. We've got to see discipleship as an ongoing journey of people growing in their faith. And there's no cookie cutter way, like you said, Peter, no cookie cutter way to get everyone in the same place. We can talk about rhythms, we can talk about practices of faith, etc. But if we try to give somebody, this is your one size fits all program of discipleship, I think we're going to, affect a small percentage of people, and they will grow, but other people left languishing. So I think we've got to actually be much more intentional about seeing ways we can grow. For some people, it'll be emphasising in this area. We've tended to think just you just read your Bible enough, you just pray enough, you'll be a great disciple. It's not going to be like that. It's how do I reach my neighbour? How do I bring them along the journey? How do I disciple people from even before they become followers of Jesus? So I think we've got to expand our view of discipleship and what it means to be a disciple, rather than just try to get back to what we've always done.
Thanks, mate. Craig, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I'd echo what Tim says. And the dilemma for many of us is that we and the people that we lead have grown up with a certain mentality and mindset and experience. And so in order to, I guess, go to a new place, we've got to allow ourselves to let go of some things, but also to experience some new things. You know, one of the things that we've noticed as a trend is that many churches are not only talking about discipleship and formation, which is so exciting, but they're also discovering, unfortunately, through COVID and the pandemic and lockdowns, that they were way too event or program oriented, that they thought that that would build disciples. And this goes all the way back to Reveal and Willow Creek and 4DX and the like. This is a long burn conversation. But I think the pandemic and that trend has said, oh, wow, this is real for us too. And so there's this expectation in a consumerist society that we live in, and that includes us in the church, that we've got to break certain patterns of thinking and certain expectations that we have, but also other people have. And I know that, you know, when I was a pastor, I was very, very nervous about trying new things that would disappoint or upset people who wanted X. And, you know, whenever you change anything like that, there is some nervousness. And so I love how Peter said that, you know, experiments are really helpful. And so, Peter, you're going to ask me, you know, are there some examples? Let me give you just maybe two very simple ones. Not all of these have worked perfectly, but I think the intent is really interesting. One church that I'm aware of, they said, how do you grow disciples? Well, you don't grow them just, you know, as Tim said, by preaching or, you know, reading the Bible. There's other things, the ways of Jesus. How do we help people learn and grow in the ways of Jesus? So this church developed spiritual retreats and invited all of their church to go, you know, in small cohorts on a journey over 3 years into spiritual retreats. And I thought, that's a brilliant idea. And I think that's one way. Another church said, how do we help people have the space? We put so much energy into a Sunday meeting. Is that getting it done? Are people growing in Christ? And they've actually been experimenting with a fortnightly rhythm. Now, some churches, as you know, will have been doing a monthly rhythm, but most of us do a weekly rhythm. Now, will those things all work? No, but I think the intent behind that is to ask, how do we intentionally help people grow in their relationship with Jesus, not in a step-by-step program way, but in this organic way. And so it's an ongoing experiment, I think, in many of these things, Peter.
How outstanding, brother. And just as you say that, if I could use different words to say the same thing, you said the word intentional. When we train people in delegation, we talk about shared expectations. And what that example you gave was an example of someone who intentionally said, here's where we want to go to. And let me create an expectation that if you are a Christian, if you're following Jesus, you're going to be growing in your love for him, or whatever it is, as they went into that spiritual retreat. And yes, they helped people to think about how to live that out. But the expectation was the start of it, wasn't it? The intentionality that loads it.
And Peter, which, you know, as I said, sorry, you know, we need to experience some of these things as well. And that's why we run one-day spiritual retreats for ministry teams, because we want them to experience it and see what that does for them or with them to grow their own discipleship knowledge, because you can't leave where you haven't been. And so that's part of the ongoing opportunity as well.
Yeah, thank you, mate. And there is a comment on the chat that I think is worthwhile picking up, and there's lots of comments there. But both Andrew and Ben have pointed to the fact that experiments take energy. And sometimes when you do an experiment, you're going to need to not just break the mold, Ben, as you've got there, but you're going to have to say, I'm not going to do certain things so that I've got the energy. So the last thing we want to do is encourage people to just load up and load up and load up. Not just you, but load up your lay leaders. And suddenly we're exhausted.
Right.
Yeah, those spiritual retreats sound fantastic, Craig. I take it if anyone wants to take their team on one of those or be part of those, we'll give you the information, but info@partnersinministry.com. Send us an email and we'll get back to you. I love those spiritual retreats. There's an example that I would say of that intent in a more formal church that I worked with. They were more formal, a more traditional liturgy in their service. And the pastor came along and said, I want to grow disciples, but I know that this church loves its liturgy. And so the pastor used the vehicle of small groups to, again, just raise the intentionality. This is what we want to see as a disciple. Wouldn't it be great if we loved Jesus more? Wouldn't it be great? And he used the informal vehicle of small groups and meetings in those midweek meetings to raise the intensity, which actually in his traditional service on Sunday, he started to see it in the way people adopted prayer. So we work with so many denominations who have so many different styles, but we see ministers who are really working hard on discipleship, and it's such a blessing for us to witness it. Tim, do you want to add anything to this piece about intentional discipleship?
The only thing I'd say, Peter, is that sometimes we have to start with it's a mindset journey. So, and this is not a political statement, but when you've lived with the whole emphasis on, and rightly so, on personal safety and societal safety for a prolonged period of time, what happens is you turn in on yourself because that it becomes us. So the church does that; it's about us, and I think we have to make a mindset shift that we've got to move away from that and move out of that space and start to see how can we attempt things, how can we have a go at things, how can we not worry about failing so much, and how can we trust God in some new areas that we haven't done before. So I think some of it starts with a mindset of let's move away from just hugging, like a holy huddle, if you like, which we've had to do in our own lives and even our families and our churches, and let's push the boundaries out somewhat.
Fantastic.
I love that, Tim, as well. And going all the way back to our first trend is that of many hats. What that made me also think about, both what you said then and previous, Tim, is that one of the ways that I had to manage those so many hats and wanting to try new things but not is whatever your structure is, the board, elders, deacons, whatever, is having the conversations with them around the expectations that they have and helping them to, I guess, shift their mindsets. And that's easier said than done. I appreciate that. But I think that if we're going to not wear 1,000 hats and disappoint ourselves, but also being able to experiment and try new things, that takes energy, but you need backup. You need a group of people who are going to be with you, and that's a real challenge.
Yeah.
And often what we do, Peter and Tim, as you know, is we help facilitate those conversations with boards or ministry teams in strategy days or whatever it might be. And so, teams can do that all the time by themselves, but I think it's having the conversations around expectations, mindsets, and what is it we actually want to do, like you said, Peter? What's the main game for us?
Craig, you do a lot of facilitation, both across churches and across businesses as well. As you said, lots of people can do facilitation. Why the third party? Why is the facilitation helpful in the way that you just mentioned?
Look, I mean, this is, I would say that anyone on this call could absolutely lead one of these conversations. The simple truth is there's two benefits. One is that person, and it's often the pastor that facilitates, can actually be in the conversation and not have to worry about the process. And the second is that if you've got someone who's a skilled facilitator, they can make sure that the process is well thought through and stays on track and no one dominates. And everyone knows who's been in eldership meetings very often, there's always 2 or 3 voices, and you almost know what they're going to say before they say it. And so that's why facilitation's good, because it brings some creativity and some process to that. So that's my experience anyway.
Thanks, mate. I want to add something to that, which I probably should never admit. But, you know, we love the data. We love the Effective Ministry Project. You mentioned the Reveal Project. We love the NCLS data. We love the community survey, the McCrindle data. One of the things we like to do as a third-party facilitator is bring some of that information into the room. We also want to recognise that we're there to support the church leader, to support the pastor. So we do want to help them influence towards the outcomes that are the right outcomes and manage difficult relationships in the room. A third party can do that and present that information in a very, very different way. And so we'd love to help you, by the way. There's an ad for you, if we can help you in any way. Craig, if I come back to you, so just a warning before I go to Craig, please feel free. We're going to stop now and allow questions. We've got just about a quarter of an hour to handle questions. But Ben's asked a question of you, Craig, and I think it's a great question, because I think this is the wrestle for many of us when it comes to evangelism. Ben has said, you know, the old method, you know, make friends and invite them to church. You know, he recognises at the end of the day, that is what works, or make friends and share your faith. That's the gospel method, right? That's the New Testament method. But he just says, is there anything that genuinely might change our methods, or anything that you want to accentuate? Because we are saying, make friends, live out your faith. I think we're saying behind it, church leaders trust people to have a faith, grow their faith, that they might share their faith. 1 Peter 3 rings in my ears, you know, equip people so and encourage people and trust people to give the reason for their faith. But Craig, is there anything you want to add to that?
I'd say, yeah, a couple of things come to my mind. And Ben, it's a great wrestle. You know, I would say to you, earlier on in my Christian life, I saw people who weren't Christians as prospects. How do I get related with them, you know, like them like me, so that now it's a completely different mindset. I would say that my mindset is I want to love people without an agenda. I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and this lady had come out of a cult, and she said that the people who were in this cult, when she left it, they all cut her off. And they said they had to, because they believed so much in this belief set that they couldn't have a relationship of love without conditions. And it stopped me in my tracks as I recognized, you know, how easy that is for me and maybe for others to love with conditions, i.e. I'm loving you, but really it's with an agenda. And so where I think I'd love for myself and maybe for others to get to is where love is unconditional, and I love you so much that I want you to know what I know, feel what I feel, relate to Jesus as I relate to him. Not saying that I've got all the answers or got my life together, but that's the gift I want to give. And I was reading something the other day about, you know, we praise God and its completeness is when we share it. And so that's the same with my love for Jesus. It's a gift that I want to give, but it's not, my love is not conditional on it. So that's, I guess, where I'm more moving towards, and where I would be moving the people I lead towards, understanding that's a nuanced position. Understand that that's hard at times. Yeah.
And I guess that's why you talked about the internal and the external, because as a leader, you're trying to grow the internal that they might love the external, which is your shift. I want to go to a question that maybe follows on from this one, Craig. A really good question from James about the uncertainty in the world. There's been so much uncertainty as we go back through the political world, the fires, COVID, etc. And one thing we see in the Australian Community Survey is actually Gen Z and Gen Y, they're more open to spiritual stuff at the moment. they're more open to a conversation about the Lord. Whereas you see baby boomers and veterans probably haven't shifted that much in their openness. Any thoughts on how we can take advantage or leverage the uncertainty to bring the certainty of our sovereign Lord to the table?
There's a couple of thoughts that come to my mind. There's two things. One is what we don't want to do, I don't think, is, in uncertainty, what people look for, and excuse this expression, but this is the expression that comes to mind, is they look for the strong man. They look for someone who is certain, and they say, and this is the way it is in the world. And there's a certain comfort to that, but there's also, it puts, boundaries and even fences around us. And I don't know if that's helpful. So I think that what we get to do is point to deeper principles and values. That is where true certainty comes from. When you know who you are and whose you are, then whatever is happening in the world, there's less anxiety about it. And many of you know exactly that and are living that. So it's enabling people to have the conversation around not, what do I put my certainty in terms of, is it in, money or status or those old chestnuts, but it's having the deeper conversation around as we know who I am in God and whose I am, loved by him, affirmed by him, then this sense of being, with the lighthouse in the midst of the storm enables us to move forward. So
I think one of the things that's really encouraging to see in that younger age group, and in my case, that everyone's a younger age group, but one of the great things to see is I think people are looking more for substance, more than shallowness, more than just an experience, more than just froth. I don't want to take away from experience and emotion, because that's really important. But I think young people are looking for substance. So we need to kind of make sure that we're not just doing church. It's just a model on the weekend. It's an hour of coming together and doing stuff. We've got to make sure we're doing that. And it leads me into one of the things I would have said to Ben with his question before. One of the ways I'm starting to think about the future is the church as homes and hubs. So there's homes where we need to live out our faith, and the hub, which is more the local church. And I think you need both. I don't think it's, I think if you just have church at home, it's losing something. If it's just in the hub, behind those four walls we meet together so often, it's losing something. I'm starting to think homes and hubs are where it matters. If I can, it's not just a matter of getting people to come to church. It's where can I engage people in the home and the hub? Where will that come first? And where will that happen? I think that's when we got to start thinking in the whole process and starting to build substance into our program.
Yeah. Tim, Stuart just raised a really important issue, and it was something we were coming back to. So we're talking about experimentation. We're talking about try this. And yet we started off talking about the pressure on pastors. How do we make that congruent? How do we bring that together? Can you speak into that? Because pastors are tired. Pastors are exhausted, and change is exhausting. You got any thoughts?
It's a very difficult balance, because the expectation is, particularly coming out of COVID, if that's where we're going, is we've got to start to see some new metrics happening well. And I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. One, as I mentioned earlier, we need to have our sense of well-being, our security and our identity firmly rooted in Jesus, because if it's just how well the church is going, you could try 3 things that fail miserably before something that sort of gets traction. So we've got to be open to that. We've got to know personally where our authority, our security is. But as well as that, we need to have teams around us, particularly leadership teams and governance teams, who are open to give it a go, who are open to experiment, to try new things and not think it's the be all and end all, and be able to tweak and evaluate and say that didn't work. We've got to have leadership teams that are not just locked in, and it isn't easy. I think it was Stephen who asked that question. It isn't easy. It takes some time. But firstly, we might need to start with discipleship in our teams and our governance groups.
And that's the whole thing, isn't it? Intentionality in small, where Craig went rather than programs, discipleship and intentionality. This is the wrestle. And yet, Stuart, thanks for raising that. Burnout is a serious issue for ministry. About a quarter of ministers are wrestling with burnout. About another half are seeing it in some way. And that's why I think it's our third topic in this series will actually be on burnout. Our next topic will be on abiding in ministry, how to maintain life-giving relationship with God whilst being a pastor, which of course is the start of this idea of discipleship. I am a disciple first, who makes other disciples. So we don't want to ignore this stuff, and we certainly don't want to trivialize anything here. So thank you for raising that. Craig, Lisa has asked a really good question. Without being programmatic, our people, the people who are in our church, are mixing with people of different faiths, different life expressions, different cultural backgrounds. How might we as leaders help people to lean into the conversations in their work, their uni, their school, their mother's group, wherever they're mixing with people? You got any quick ideas on that one? Or is it just, hey, we've got to live life?
Well, no. I think that it's a great question, because how do you equip people? And there's two things that come to my mind. First is, if our faith is never tested by competing ideas, philosophies, even religious ideas, then often we don't know why we actually believe it. And, I think that mixing with people is really important. So I think that the first thing I would say is help people really understand. George Barna talked about it as a really biblical worldview. And he thinks, and his research says that is the fundamental thing that will help people be Christian, stay Christian, and share their faith in appropriate ways. So helping people to develop a biblical worldview that's rooted in understanding about why I believe this and how I can explain this. So that's the first bit. And then the second bit is to help people to know how to express their faith in everyday language that makes sense to the average Aussie. Now, that's more challenging, I think, than we're saying. But those two things, helping people to understand what they believe and why, and being able to express that, and then what their experience of Jesus and his saving grace has been, and being able to express that in a real way.
Yeah.
But I think that the thing that is most helpful when people are rubbing against each other is, as in different faiths or different experiences of life, is curiosity and respect. If I can be curious about why do you believe that, help me understand this, and respect their view, and not say that's stupid, which of course no one would do, but any version of that then affords others to ask back for us. So tell me about yours. How come? And so that's our experience.
And this is not rocket science, but this requires practice and implementation. And you and I have both got a training background. I've been training sales teams most of my life. One of the things that might be worthwhile saying is, for pastors, that sort of training is not a didactic training. That sort of training is not, let me tell you what to say. That sort of training is about doing it together, like in a small group or in a roundtable conversation, just hearing what would you say, or sharing conversations that you had at work with each other, that you might imitate from others, that you might steal lines. In a sales role, I used to be in pharmaceuticals, we would train people to do practice selling in front of each other. It's the same thing. Hear the common language that people use. It takes a bit of time, but it takes time, it takes energy, and therefore it requires someone to decide that's what we're going to do. and be intentional about it. Thank you, guys. I'm really, really grateful. 1 minute question that Luke has asked. Luke, we'll try and get it. I'll ask it of you, Tim, but church planting has been recognised as one of the key methods of evangelising. COVID has thrown everything up against the wall. Do you think there's a role for digital church about what we do with church planting? Have we got time to talk about that, or do we need to think about that and come back?
Digital church is on a whole new webinar, I think. But I do think that that's right. There is opportunity. Church planting still got to stay on very much to the forefront of church life, because it is the most effective way of reaching people, just building churches. But it has to be done in person, has to be done online, has to be done any way we can to build a healthy expression of the body of Christ and the kingdom of God. How we can do that is important to do that. And there are some people who just love hosting online. And if they're good at that, you might be a church planter, who knows. So I think we've got it's a bigger thing than a 1 minute conversation, but it's important.
Thank you, mate. Luke, sorry we did that so quickly, but it is time for us to start closing up. I want to say, so this is just the first in our series of webinars. As I said, we did a survey at the end of last year. We loved your feedback. And so there's a number of webinars we're going to do over the coming months. We recognise that being a pastor is a challenging role. We realise that many of the things that you landed yourself into, leadership and management, you were never trained to do. Some of you were. And so we'd love to get along beside you. Partners in Ministry, our desire is to see the Australian Church of Christ flourish. The way we work to do that is by supporting church leaders as you lead churches. We do that primarily by walking beside pastors, helping them in their personal life, their personal faith, and helping them professionally. We have about 20 trusted, skillful and confidential people, men, women of different denominational backgrounds, to work with you. If you're interested in talking about someone supporting you and having someone matched up with you, please do reach out to us. Info@Partners in Ministry. But we also do consultancy, and with the NCLS coming out soon, we'd love to sit with you and help you think through how you could best use the NCLS to think about how you shape what goes on in church. If you didn't do the NCLS, we'd be happy to do that with you anyway. We also provide training in some of those leadership and management skills that we know that many people were never trained in, such as delegation, coaching, strategic planning, and things like that. We'd love to help you discern the best way forward. But please do join us for our webinars in the future. Make sure you make contact with us. Follow us on our website at www.partnersinministry.com. Our next webinar will be on the 12th of May, the same time, 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Daylight savings will be finished by then. 1 o'clock on the 12th of May. And the title for that one is Abiding in Ministry, How to Maintain a Life-Giving Relationship with God whilst being a pastor. And I'm so pleased that Andrew Ranucci, Mark Connor, and Kathy Elkington will be leading that discussion. I'll be your host, but I'm so looking forward to hearing what they will say. Will you please join us on the 12th of May? But folks, thanks so much for joining us today. We hope this was helpful for you. Please feel free to send us an email of feedback and reach out to us on email if we can help you in any way. We'd love to support you under our good and our gracious God. Thanks so much. God bless.